The unexpected benefits of loneliness. A counterintuitive perspective. Loneliness, a word that often triggers discomfort, fear, or sadness. It is a condition that most people try to avoid at all costs. In our hyper-connected world, where communication is instantaneous and attention is currency, being alone can feel like a punishment. But what if loneliness isn't what we think it is? What if, rather than a sign of failure or social rejection, it holds a deeper, more transformative value? This video explores an uncomfortable but profound question. Could loneliness be a hidden catalyst for growth, creativity, and even self-realization? Let us begin with the cultural lens. Society teaches us to associate our worth with our social status. How many friends we have, how busy our calendars look, how often our phones buzz with messages. We're constantly fed the idea that to be happy is to be surrounded by people, to be part of a crowd. But this belief is not universal. Many ancient traditions saw solitude not as a lack, but as a gateway, a passage into something more real, more essential. In Buddhism, retreating from the world is a vital part of awakening. In Christian monasticism, isolation becomes a sacred dialogue with the divine. Even the Stoics, rational as they were, advised embracing solitude as a means to cultivate virtue. When we are alone, we are no longer performing. There is no audience to impress, no social mirror reflecting back a curated self. What remains is the raw, unedited version of who we are. And often this encounter is uncomfortable. It reveals our insecurities, our unresolved questions, and the voices we usually drown in distraction. But these revelations are not signs of weakness. They are invitations. They point us to areas in need of healing, reflection, and reintegration. Friedrich Nietzsche famously said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." In his view, solitude was the price of authenticity. To think for yourself, to live on your own terms, to resist the herd mentality. These are impossible tasks if one never learns how to be alone. Nietzsche's idea was not about arrogance or superiority, but about inner clarity. In the absence of social noise, we can finally hear our own thoughts. Yet modern life offers fewer and fewer moments for solitude. Algorithms know us better than we know ourselves. We scroll not to learn, but to forget. We text not to connect, but to distract. But this constant digital presence doesn't actually eliminate loneliness. It deepens it, because we're never really alone, but we're also never fully with anyone. We exist in a limbo, hyper-connected yet emotionally starved. The antidote, paradoxically, is intentional solitude. Intentional solitude is different from isolation. It is not the loneliness of rejection, but the solitude of choice. It is the sacred decision to turn inward, to silence the world and face ourselves. And while this may seem daunting, it is in this quiet space that real transformation happens. Consider the role of loneliness in creativity. Countless artists, writers, and philosophers have attributed their greatest insights to moments of solitude. Virginia Woolf spoke of a room of one's own as a necessity for creative expression. Henry David Thoreau withdrew to Walden Pond to write, reflect, and rediscover the simplicity of life. These were not acts of social withdrawal, but of spiritual deepening. Solitude provided them a canvas unspoiled by the expectations of others. Psychologically, loneliness can be a mirror. It shows us where we've lost touch with ourselves. When you strip away the constant input from others, you're left with the question, what do I think? What do I feel? And perhaps most importantly, who am I when no one is watching? This kind of inner confrontation can feel brutal. It might bring anxiety, sadness, or even despair. But these emotions are not the enemy. They are part of the human experience, and when faced directly, they can lead to a kind of psychological alchemy. The pain of loneliness, when understood, becomes the soil for resilience, self-knowledge, and inner peace. In solitude, we begin to redefine what connection truly means. Ironically, the more we embrace our own aloneness, the more capable we become of authentic connection. When you no longer fear being alone, you stop clinging to others out of desperation. You begin to relate to people not out of need, but out of genuine curiosity and care. Relationships deepen because they are no longer based on avoidance of the self, but on a shared presence. From a philosophical perspective, loneliness touches on the existential. Existentialists like Sartre and Camus emphasize the individual's isolation in a meaningless universe. But they didn't stop there. They saw in this isolation the possibility for freedom. Without the comforting structures of religion, tradition, or societal roles, the individual is forced to confront the absurd and choose. Choose who to become. Choose how to live. In this sense, loneliness becomes the birthplace of authenticity. But not all solitude is created equal. There is a fine line between loneliness that nourishes and loneliness that destroys. Chronic isolation, especially when imposed, can lead to depression, anxiety, and alienation. The key difference lies in intention and awareness. Are you choosing solitude as a space for reflection? Or are you being pulled into isolation by fear and avoidance? This is why cultivating a healthy relationship with loneliness requires mindfulness. It means observing your inner world without judgment. It means creating a sanctuary within yourself, a space that doesn't depend on external approval to feel whole. Meditation, journaling, long walks, or simply sitting in silence. These practices can help you build this inner sanctuary. There is also a spiritual dimension to all this. Many mystical traditions speak of a divine silence, a presence that can only be felt in the absence of noise. The mystic doesn't find God in the crowd, but in the cave, in the desert, in the long, aching quiet of the soul. This is not about religion, but about the deeper layers of consciousness. Solitude, when entered with openness, can reveal dimensions of self that are otherwise inaccessible. And perhaps that is the true gift of loneliness. Not just as a tool for creativity or psychological growth, but as a portal, a threshold between who we think we are and who we might become, between the persona and the essence. In this light, loneliness is not a flaw in the human condition. It is part of the design, a necessary friction that wakes us from the hypnosis of social conditioning. So, what do we do with this understanding? How do we live it? First, we stop pathologizing loneliness. Feeling alone doesn't mean you're broken. It means you are human. And like all human experiences, it has something to teach. Next, we learn to sit with it, to resist the urge to escape, to listen, to ask the questions that only arise in silence. What do I value? What am I afraid of? What kind of life do I want to live? Finally, we learn to honor solitude as a sacred space, not as a retreat from life, but as a way to meet it more fully. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who are comfortable in silence, people who know themselves deeply, who act not from fear but from clarity. Loneliness, then, is not the enemy. It is a mirror, a teacher, a companion. It strips away illusion and reveals what is real. And in a world addicted to stimulation, that is nothing short of revolutionary. So the next time you find yourself alone, don't rush to fill the silence. Let it speak. It might just have something important to say. In embracing loneliness, we reclaim something that has long been forgotten, our inner life. In the stillness, we remember that we are not just social beings, but also spiritual ones, that our value is not determined by our connections, but by our capacity to connect inward. The unexpected benefit of loneliness is this: it brings us back to ourselves, and from there, anything is possible.